Welcome to a world where reality blurs with the unimaginable. Tonight, we delve into true scary stories that will send shivers down your spine. These are not just tales spun from the depths of imagination. These are allegedly real-life encounters that will chill you to the bone. From eerie phone calls that invade your privacy to the unsettling disappearance of beloved pets, each story reveals the hidden dangers lurking in the shadows of everyday life. So, dim the lights, settle in, and prepare yourself for a journey into the unknown. Remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that actually happen. Let's get started. This crazy thing happened to my family last month. I'm still kind of freaked out about it. We live in this quiet suburb. You know, the kind where everyone knows everyone and nothing bad ever happens. Or so we thought. It all started when our dog, Max, went missing. He's this big, friendly golden retriever, always hanging out in our fenced backyard. One day, we let him out like usual, but when we called him back in for dinner, he was gone. We searched the whole neighborhood, calling his name, but no luck. We were pretty upset, especially my kids. Max had been with us for years. He was like part of the family. So we did what anyone would do, made a bunch of missing dog flyers and put them up all over the neighborhood. We talked to all our neighbors, asking if they'd seen him. Everyone was really nice about it, saying they'd keep an eye out. A few days went by, still no sign of Max. That's when things started getting weird. My wife was talking to our neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, and she mentioned that her cat had gone missing a few weeks back. Then we heard from another family down the street that their rabbit had disappeared from its hutch in their backyard. I didn't think much of it at first. You know, animals go missing sometimes, it happens. But then I started noticing this guy who lived a few houses down acting kind of strange. Let's call him Mr. Smith. He'd always been a bit of a loner. But now he seemed really nervous whenever we talked about the missing pets. He'd change the subject, or make excuses to leave. About a week after Max disappeared, we got this anonymous note in our mailbox. It just said, "Check the old Wilson house. Bring help." The Wilson house was this abandoned place at the edge of our neighborhood. It had been empty for years, all boarded up and overgrown. I didn't know what to think, but we were desperate to find Max. I called my buddy Mike to come with me, just in case. We drove over there that evening, feeling pretty nervous. The place looked creepy as hell, all dark and falling apart. We heard barking as soon as we got out of the car. Sounded like Max. We followed the sound to the back of the house, where we found a cellar door that was padlocked. Mike and I looked at each other, not sure what to do. In the end, we decided to break the lock. I mean, our dog was in there, right? When we opened the door, the smell hit us first. It was awful, like something had died down there. We turned on our flashlights and headed down the stairs. What we saw? Man, I still have nightmares about it. There were cages everywhere, filled with animals. Dogs, cats, rabbits, you name it. Some were alive. Others, well, it was pretty clear they hadn't made it. And there, in one of the cages, was Max. He was skinny and scared, but alive. We called the cops right away. They came and rescued all the animals they could. Turns out, this had been going on for months. Someone had been stealing pets from all over the neighborhood and keeping them in this makeshift shelter. Here's the really messed up part. While the police were investigating, they found evidence linking it all back to Mr. Smith. Yeah, our weird neighbor. Apparently, he'd been running some kind of illegal animal breeding operation. He'd steal pets, breed them, and sell the puppies and kittens online. The whole neighborhood was in shock. This guy had lived among us for years, and no one had any idea what he was really up to. It makes you wonder what other secrets people might be hiding. You know? We got Max back, and he's doing okay now. But things haven't been the same since. Everyone's a lot more cautious, keeping a closer eye on their pets and kids. It's like this dark cloud is hanging over our once peaceful neighborhood. I guess the scariest part is realizing that you never really know what's going on behind closed doors, even in a place that seems safe and friendly. It's changed the way I look at my neighbors, that's for sure. Makes you wonder what other secrets might be lurking in our quiet little suburb. So this happened to me about a year ago, and I still can't shake it off. I was working the night shift at this old warehouse on the edge of town. It's in this really run-down area, you know? Like, kind of place where you don't want to be caught after dark. Anyway, I was doing my usual rounds, checking the locks and stuff, when I heard this weird noise coming from outside. First I thought it was just some stray cats fighting or something. Then I heard it again, and it sounded more like, I don't know, like someone crying. I'm not gonna lie, I was pretty freaked out, but I figured I should at least take a look, you know? So I grabbed my flashlight and headed towards the back of the warehouse where the sound was coming from. As I got closer, I could see this fancy car parked in the alley behind the building. It looked really out of place in this neighborhood. That's when I noticed her. This girl, probably in her early 20s, stumbling around near the car. She was wearing this expensive-looking dress and high heels, totally not dressed for this part of town. I called out to her, asking if she was okay. She turned towards me, and I could see her makeup was all messed up, like she'd been crying. She looked scared and confused. She told me her name was Emily, and that she was lost. Said she'd been at some fancy party downtown, and her phone died. She tried to use her car's GPS to get home, but it led her to this neighborhood instead. Now her car wouldn't start, and she was stuck here. I felt bad for her, you know? She clearly didn't belong in this area. I offered to call her a tow truck or something, but she just kept saying she wanted to call her dad. So I let her use my phone. While she was on the phone, I noticed this beat-up van slowly cruising down the street. It gave me a bad feeling, but I tried to ignore it. Emily was still talking to her dad, sounding all panicky and stuff. Suddenly, the van stopped right in front of us. 3 guys jumped out, and before I could even react, they grabbed Emily. She started screaming, and I tried to help her, I swear. But one of the guys pulled out a gun and pointed it at me. I froze. Couldn't move. I just stood there watching as they dragged Emily into the van. She was kicking and screaming the whole time, but there was nothing I could do. They sped off, leaving me standing there in shock. It all happened so fast, you know? 1 minute, she was just this lost rich girl in the wrong place, and the next, she was gone. I called the cops right away, but by the time they showed up, there was no sign of the van or Emily. I keep replaying it in my head, wondering if I could have done something different. But every time, I just see that gun pointed at me, and I freeze up all over again. I found out later that Emily was the daughter of some big-shot businessman. There was a huge search for her, but as far as I know, they never found her. It was all over the news for weeks. I can't help but think about how different our worlds were, you know? She probably never even knew places like this existed in her city. And in just one night, her whole life changed. It really messed me up, seeing how quickly things can go wrong. I quit that job after that night. Didn't stand being in that warehouse anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see Emily's terrified face as they dragged her away. It's been a year, but I still have nightmares about it sometimes. I guess the scariest part is knowing that this kind of thing can happen to anyone, anywhere. You never know when you might end up in the wrong place at the wrong time. It really makes you realize how fragile everything is, you know? So, this crazy thing happened to my wife a few months ago, and it still freaks me out to think about it. We live in this quiet suburb, you know, the kind where nothing ever really happens, just normal family stuff. It all started when my wife, let's call her Sarah, started getting these weird phone calls late at night. The first one came around 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was already asleep because I had an early shift the next day, but Sarah was still up watching TV. She said the call was from an unknown number, and when she answered, this guy asked, "Is Tommy feeling better?" That's our son's name, and he had been homesick from school that day. Sarah was confused and asked who was calling, but the guy just hung up. She told me about it the next morning, and we figured it was probably just a wrong number or something. But then it happened again the next night, and the night after that. Each time, the caller would ask something specific about our family. Like, did Katie enjoy her soccer game? Or how was your mom's visit last weekend? It was creepy how much this person seemed to know about us. Sarah was getting really freaked out, and honestly, so was I. We tried blocking the number, but the calls would just come from a different one each time. We decided to go to the police, but they said there wasn't much they could do since the caller hadn't actually threatened us. They told us to keep a log of the calls and to let them know if things escalated. Things were tense at home. We started double-checking all the locks, closing all the curtains at night, and being extra careful about what we posted on social media. I even installed some security cameras around the house. The calls kept coming, getting more and more personal. The guy would mention things like what we had for dinner or what color shirt I wore to work. It was like he was watching us all the time. Dara was a mess. She couldn't sleep, always jumping at every little noise in the house. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to find her staring out the window, looking for anyone who might be out there. We tried using one of those phone tracing apps to figure out where the calls were coming from, but it never gave us an exact location, just somewhere in our neighborhood. That's when it hit us. Caller had to be someone close by. We started paying more attention to our neighbors, trying to spot anyone acting suspicious, but everyone seemed normal, you know? The breaking point came about 2 weeks into this nightmare. Dara got a call while I was in the shower. When I came out, she was white as a sheet. The guy had said, "I like the new blue towels in your bathroom." We just bought those towels that day. There was no way anyone could have known about them unless they were inside our house. We called the cops right away. They came and searched the place, but didn't find anyone. They did find a small camera hidden in our living room, though. Turns out someone had been watching us from inside our own home. Police set up a sting operation, and you won't believe who they caught. It was our next-door neighbor, this quiet guy who we'd known for years. He'd been sneaking into our house when we were out and planting cameras. He had this whole setup in his basement where he'd been watching us and a bunch of other families in the neighborhood. They arrested him, and we found out he had a history of this kind of thing in other cities. He'd move to a new place, act all friendly and normal, and then start his creepy stalking routine. We moved out of that house as soon as we could. Couldn't stand the thought of staying there knowing what had happened. We're in a new place now, but it's still hard to feel safe. Sarah still checks for hidden cameras every time we come home, and I don't think either of us will ever take our privacy for granted again. Scary to think how well you think you know your neighbors, you know? Makes you wonder what secrets people might be hiding behind those friendly smiles and perfectly mowed lawns. This happened to me and my buddies last summer. We were bored out of our minds. You know how it is in small towns. There's this old Victorian house on the edge of town that's been abandoned for years. Everyone knows about it, but no one ever goes there. We thought it'd be cool to check it out. There were 4 of us, me, Jake, Mike, and Chris. We grabbed some flashlights and headed out there one Friday night. The place looked creepy as hell, all overgrown with weeds and stuff. Paint was peeling, and some of the windows were broken. It was like something out of a horror movie, I swear. We found a way in through a back door that was barely hanging on its hinges. The inside was a mess, old furniture covered in dust, cobwebs everywhere, and this musty smell that made me want to gag. But we were pumped to explore, you know? We started in the living room, looking at all the old stuff left behind. There were some faded pictures on the walls, and it was weird seeing these happy families, knowing the house ended up like this. As we moved through the rooms, I started feeling uneasy. It was probably just my imagination, but I swear I could hear whispers. Jake laughed it off when I mentioned it, saying it was just the wind. But then Mike said he saw something move out of the corner of his eye. We all got a bit freaked out, but tried to play it cool. Chris suggested we check out the upstairs. The stairs creaked so loud, I thought they might collapse. Upstairs was even worse, more dust, more cobwebs, and this feeling like we were being watched. We split up to cover more ground, which, looking back, was a dumb idea. I was checking out what looked like an old kid's room when I heard Jake yell. We all ran to where the sound came from, but he wasn't there. We called out for him, but no answer. That's when we really started to panic. We searched everywhere, calling Jake's name. Chris was about to call the cops when Mike noticed something weird about one of the walls in the master bedroom. It looked off somehow. We pushed on it, and to our shock, it opened up to reveal a hidden room. What we saw inside, man, I still have nightmares about it. The walls were covered with photographs, hundreds of them. At first, we thought they were just old family photos or something, but then we looked closer. They were pictures of people exploring the house, just like us. Some looked really old, others more recent, and in each photo, the people looked terrified, like they were screaming or running from something. We recognized some faces from missing person reports we'd seen on the news over the years. That's when we heard a noise behind us. We turned around, and there was Jake, looking pale and shaken. He said he'd been in the room the whole time, couldn't hear us calling for him. It was like the room had been soundproof or something. We got the hell out of there as fast as we could. None of us wanted to stick around to find out what happened to the people in those photos. We went straight to the police, but when they checked out the house, they couldn't find the hidden room. They said we must have imagined it or something. But I know what we saw. Sometimes I think about going back, just to prove it wasn't all in our head. But then I remember those photos, and the look on Jake's face when we found him, and I know I never want to set foot in that house again. I don't know what was going on in that house, but it wasn't normal. And I can't shake the feeling that we only got out because whatever's in there, it let us go. This happened to my sister about a month ago, and it still gives me chills thinking about it. She had just moved to a new city for work and was trying to make friends, you know? She decided to host this small dinner party at her new place, inviting a few coworkers and some neighbors she'd met. The night started off great. Everyone was having a good time, laughing and chatting. There were 5 people there, including this guy named Tom. He said he lived in the apartment building across the street and that they bumped into each other at the local coffee shop a few times. At first, everything seemed normal. The food was good, people were getting along. But as the night went on, my sister started noticing some weird things about Tom. Like, he kept bringing up really specific details about her life that she didn't remember telling him. He mentioned her favorite book, which was kind of obscure, and even knew the name of her childhood pet. She tried to brush it off, thinking maybe she'd mentioned these things and just forgot. But then he started talking about a trip she'd taken last year, describing details that she was sure she hadn't shared with anyone there. My sister started feeling uneasy, but she didn't want to make a scene. She kept watching Tom, though, and noticed how he seemed to know the layout of her apartment really well, like where the bathroom was without asking, and even which cabinet the extra napkins were in. As the night went on, she got more and more freaked out. She overheard him talking to another guest about a restaurant she'd been to last week, describing exactly what she'd ordered. That's when she realized she'd never even told anyone about going to that restaurant. She tried to keep her cool, but she was starting to panic inside. She went to the kitchen to get some air and noticed her phone on the counter. When she picked it up, she saw a notification for a new app she didn't remember downloading. It looked like some kind of tracking app. That's when things got really scary. She started putting the pieces together. The weird comments, the knowledge about her life, the app on her phone. She realized Tom must have been watching her for weeks, maybe even months. She didn't know what to do. She couldn't just confront him in front of everyone, but she was terrified of what might happen if she didn't do something. She texted me, trying to act casual while asking me to call her with an emergency, but she'd have an excuse to end the party early. I called her right away, and she made up some story about our mom being sick. She apologized to everyone and started ushering them out. Tom lingered, offering to help clean up. She insisted she was fine. As he was leaving, he hugged her goodbye and whispered, "I'll see you soon." The way he said it made her blood run cold. As soon as everyone was gone, she called the police. They came and took her statement, but since Tom hadn't actually done anything illegal that they could prove, there wasn't much they could do right then. They told her to document everything, to call them immediately. Anything else happened. My sister was a wreck after that. She stayed with me for a week, too scared to go back to her apartment. When she finally did go back, she found out that no one in the building across the street had ever heard of a guy named Tom. She ended up moving out of that apartment and changing her phone number. She's doing better now, but she's still really paranoid about meeting new people. It's scary to think how easily someone can pretend to be someone they're not, you know? And how much information they can gather about you without you even realizing it. I guess the moral of the story is to be careful about what you share online and with people you don't know well. You never know who might be watching or what their intentions are. This crazy thing happened to my sister last month, and I still can't believe it. She lives in this fancy apartment building downtown, you know, one of those modern ones with all the glass and steel. She's always been independent, living alone and all that. It started with these weird texts she got. At first it was just little things, like nice red shirt today, or how was your coffee at Starbucks? She thought it was just some mix-up, maybe someone texting the wrong number. But then they got more specific, talking about stuff only someone who could see her would know. She told me about it over dinner one night, and I could tell she was freaked out. I mean, who wouldn't be? She showed me some of the messages, and they were creepy as hell. Stuff like, you look tired today, maybe you should close your curtains and get some rest, or that new guy from 3B seems nice, don't you think? I told her to go to the cops, but she didn't want to make a big deal out of it. Said she'd just block the number and forget about it. But the texts kept coming from different numbers each time. It was like whoever was doing this knew when she blocked them and just switched to a new number. After a couple weeks, she was a mess, jumping at every little noise, always looking over her shoulder. She started changing up her routine, trying to throw off whoever was watching her. But the texts kept coming, always knowing where she'd been and what she'd done. I stayed over at her place a few times, trying to catch whoever it was. The hallways in her building are always so dim and quiet, it's eerie. We'd hear footsteps sometimes, but when we'd look, there'd be no one there. It was like the whole building was playing tricks on us. One night, she got a text that really freaked her out. It said, "You look so peaceful when you sleep." That's when we knew it had to be someone in the building. How else could they see into her apartment? We set up a camera in her living room, hoping to catch something. For days, nothing happened. But then, one night, when she was out late, the camera caught something. There was this shadow moving around her apartment. Someone had gotten in. We took the footage to the police, and they finally took it seriously. They set up a sting operation, waiting for the guy to show up again. And you know what? It worked. They caught him trying to break in. Turns out, it was the building's maintenance guy. He had keys to all the apartments and had been obsessed with my sister for months. He'd been sneaking into her place when she was out, going through her stuff, even sleeping in her bed sometimes. The thought of it still makes me sick. The cops found all kinds of creepy stuff in his apartment. Pictures of my sister, notes about her daily routine, even some of her clothes he'd stolen. It was like something out of a horror movie, but it was real. My sister moved out of that place right after. Can't say I blame her. She's doing better now, but she still gets jumpy sometimes. Checks her locks about 100 times a night. I guess the scariest part is knowing that this guy seemed totally normal. He'd wave and smile when we passed him in the hallway, always polite and helpful. Just goes to show you never really know who people are or what they're capable of. It's been a few months now, and things are slowly getting back to normal. But I don't think either of us will ever feel completely safe in an apartment building again. You just never know who might be watching. This weird thing happened to me last month, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. I live in this quiet suburb, you know the type. Nice houses, well-kept lawns, everyone knows everyone. Nothing ever really happens here. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I got home from work and found this package on my doorstep. No big deal, right? Except I wasn't expecting anything, and there was no return address on it. Just my name and address, typed out on a plain white label. I brought it inside, thinking maybe it was a surprise gift or something. When I opened it, though, I got this weird feeling in my gut. Inside was a bunch of random stuff. An old watch, some faded photos, a keychain with a name on it I didn't recognize. There was also this note that just said, "Remember me?" I had no clue what any of it meant, but something about it felt off. I started looking through the items more closely. The watch looked kind of familiar, like I'd seen it before, couldn't place where. The photos were of places around town. They looked older, like they were taken years ago. That's when I remembered something. A few years back, there was this big story in our neighborhood about a guy who went missing. His name was Mike Johnson. It was all anyone talked about for months, but they never found him. Looking at the keychain again, I realized it had his name on it. I started freaking out a bit. Why would someone send me this stuff? I barely knew Mike. He lived a few streets over, and I'd only talked to him a couple times at neighborhood barbecues. I didn't know what to do, so I called my buddy who's a cop. He said I should bring everything down to the station. But before I could, I got this text from an unknown number. Just said, "Curious yet?" Over the next few days, more texts started coming in. They were all cryptic, asking if I remembered certain dates or places. Some of them mentioned things only someone who knew me would know, like where I went to high school or my first job. I was getting really paranoid. I started looking up old news articles about Mike's disappearance, trying to figure out if there was some connection I was missing. That's when I found this old picture from a neighborhood watch meeting. I was in the background, and right next to me was Mike. I had completely forgotten about that night. The texts kept coming, getting more and more threatening. One said, "You should have helped him." Another one warned, "You're next if you don't figure it out." I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I felt like I was being watched all the time. Every car that drove by my house made me jump. I started noticing this beat-up old truck parked on my street at odd hours. When I'd look out the window, I'd sometimes see someone sitting in it, but they'd drive off as soon as I noticed. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I gathered up all the stuff from the package and the texts I'd gotten and took them to the police. They took it all really seriously, especially when they saw Mike's things. Turns out, they reopened the investigation into Mike's disappearance. They're not telling me much, but I overheard one of the detectives saying something about new evidence and persons of interest. I'm still on edge, jumping at every little noise. I've installed security cameras all around my house, and I barely leave, except for work. The texts have stopped, but now I'm worried about what might come next. The scariest part is realizing that this quiet neighborhood I've lived in for years might be hiding some dark secret. It makes me wonder how well I really know my neighbors, and what other mysteries might be lurking behind those perfectly mowed lawns and friendly smiles. This happened to me about a month ago, and I'm still kind of freaked out about it. I was walking home from work one evening, taking my usual shortcut through this old neighborhood. You know the type. Houses that used to be nice, but now they're all run down with overgrown lawns and peeling paint. Anyway, I'm walking along, minding my own business, when I spot this wallet just lying there on the sidewalk. I pick it up, thinking maybe I can return it to the owner. Inside, there's some cash, a few credit cards, and a driver's license. The guy in the picture looked to be in his 40s, kinda average looking. I checked the address on the license, and it turns out it's not far from where I am. So, being the good guy I am, I decide to drop it off. I mean, I'd want someone to do the same for me, right? I find the house pretty easily. It's this old 2-story place with faded blue paint and a yard that looks like it hasn't been mowed in years. The windows are all dark, and there's this eerie feeling about it. I'm starting to think maybe this isn't such a good idea, but I've come this far. So I go up to the door and knock. No answer. I knock again. Louder this time. Still nothing. I'm about to leave the wallet in the mailbox when I notice the door is not fully closed. It creaks open a bit when I touch it. I call out, "Hello? Anyone home?" But it's dead silent. I don't know what made me do it, but I step inside. The place is a mess. Dust everywhere, old newspapers piled up, and this musty smell that makes me want to gag. It's clear no one's lived here for a long time. I'm about to turn around and leave when I spot something on the kitchen table. It's a bunch of missing person flyers, all with the same face, the guy from the driver's license. The dates on the flyers are from 5 years ago. Now I'm really freaked out. I start looking around more, trying to figure out what's going on. In the living room, there's this big corkboard on the wall covered in newspaper. Bing. They're all about missing people in the area over the last decade or so. That's when I notice something weird. In a lot of the photos of the missing people, there's the same guy in the background. He's not the focus, just someone in the crowd or walking by, but it's definitely the same person in each one. And get this, it's not the guy from the wallet. It's someone else entirely. I'm standing there, trying to make sense of it all, when I hear a car pull up outside. I peek out the window and see this beat-up van. A man gets out and starts walking towards the house. My heart nearly stops when I realize it's the guy from the background of all those photos. I don't know how, but somehow I managed to sneak out the back door without him seeing me. I ran all the way home and called the police as soon as I got there. They said they'd look into it, but I don't know if anything ever came of it. I've been keeping an eye on the news, hoping to see something about it, but there's been nothing. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, but then I remember the fear I felt in that moment, and I know it was real. I still can't shake the feeling that I stumbled onto something big, something dangerous. And sometimes, when I'm walking home at night, I can't help but look over my shoulder, wondering if that van might be following me. This happened to my sister last month, and I'm still freaked out about it. She's been babysitting for this family in our neighborhood for a while now. Nice couple, 2 kids, a boy who's 7 and a girl who's 5. They live in this big house in a quiet suburb. You know the type. So, it's a Friday night, and the parents are out for some work thing. My sister's there, watching the kids. Everything's normal at first. She puts them to bed around 8:30, then goes downstairs to watch some TV. Around 9, she gets this call from a number she doesn't recognize. She picks up, and this guy asks, "Are the children okay?" His voice is all weird and muffled. My sister's confused, asks who it is, but the guy just hangs up. She's a bit freaked out, but figures it's just a wrong number or something. She checks on the kids, and they're fine, sleeping peacefully. She goes back downstairs, trying to shake off the weird feeling. About half an hour later, another call. Same unknown number. This time the guy says, "You should check on the children again." My sister's really scared now. She asks how he knows about the children, but he hangs up again. She runs upstairs to check on the kids. They're still asleep. Everything looks normal. She's shaking at this point, wondering if she should call the cops. But she doesn't want to seem paranoid, you know? She goes back downstairs, but now she's too nervous to sit still. She starts checking all the doors and windows to make sure they're locked. That's when she notices the back door is unlocked. She swears she locked it earlier, but maybe she forgot? She locks it and then calls me, tells me what's going on. I tell her to call the cops, but she says she'll wait and see if anything else happens. I stay on the phone with her for a bit, trying to calm her down. Just as she's starting to relax, there's another call. This time, the guy says, "Why haven't you checked the children?" His voice sounds closer somehow, clearer. My sister's in full panic mode now. She runs upstairs again, and the kids are still okay, but now she's sure something's wrong. She calls the police, telling them about the weird calls and the unlocked door. They say they'll send someone over, but it might take a few minutes. My sister's freaking out, trying to decide if she should wake up the kids and leave the house. That's when she hears it. Floorboard creaking upstairs. She freezes, knowing it can't be the kids. Their rooms are on the other side of the house. The police are still on their way, but she knows she needs to do something now. She grabs a kitchen knife and slowly goes upstairs, her heart pounding so loud she can barely hear anything else. As she reaches the top of the stairs, she sees a shadow move across the hallway. Suddenly, her phone rings again. She nearly screams, but manages to answer it. The voice on the other end says, "I can see you." That's when she realizes the voice isn't coming just from the phone. She can hear it in the hallway too. She runs to the kids' rooms, locks herself in with them, and calls me again, crying and terrified. I tell her I'm on my way and to stay put until the police arrive. The next few minutes were the longest of her life. Told me later, she could hear footsteps in the hallway, getting closer and closer to the room. Just as the doorknob started to turn, she heard sirens outside. Police got there just in time. Turns out the guy was some creep who'd been watching the house for weeks, learning the family's routine. He'd gotten in through the basement window. My sister's okay now, but she still has nightmares about it. She doesn't babysit anymore, and honestly, I don't blame her. It's scary to think how easily someone can invade your sense of safety like that. Makes you realize you can never be too careful, even in a nice, quiet neighborhood. So, this all started about 6 months ago when my wife and I moved into our new house. It's in this really nice neighborhood. You know, all the lawns are perfectly mowed and everyone's got these cute little garden gnomes and stuff. We were pretty excited about it. The day we moved in, this guy from next door came over to introduce himself. Let's call him Tom. He seemed friendly enough, bringing us a homemade pie and offering to help with the boxes. We thought it was nice, having such a welcoming neighbor and all. At first, everything was great. Tom would wave when we left for work, sometimes chat with us when we were out in the yard. But after a few weeks, we started noticing he was always around. Like, every time we stepped outside, there he was, ready to talk. He'd ask a lot of questions too. Stuff about our jobs, our families, even what we like to eat. At the time, we just thought he was being friendly, maybe a little lonely. But looking back, it's creepy how much he knew about us. Things started getting weird when Tom began commenting on stuff he shouldn't have known about. Like, he'd mention a TV show we'd watched the night before, or ask how my wife's new project at work was going. We never told him about that stuff. We tried to distance ourselves a bit, you know? Started being less chatty, making excuses when he wanted to hang out, but that just seemed to make him more persistent. He'd accidentally bump into us at the grocery store or show up at the local coffee shop when we were there. One day I was mowing our lawn and noticed something odd in Tom's yard. There was this little patch behind a bush where the grass was all trampled down, like someone had been standing there a lot. It was right across from our bedroom window. That's when I started paying more attention. I noticed a camera peeking out from his upstairs window, pointed right at our house. And get this, one time when Tom was talking to my wife, I saw him wearing a watch that looked exactly like one I'd lost a few weeks back. We were really freaked out by this point. We started keeping all our curtains closed and even talked about moving. We just bought the house and we didn't want to let this guy scare us away. The final straw came when we were out of town for a weekend. We had a security camera set up, you know, just in case. When we checked the footage after we got back, we saw Tom sneaking around our yard, peeking in windows, even trying to open our back door. We called the cops right away. Turns out Tom had a history of this kind of thing. He'd been arrested for stalking before, but somehow managed to keep it quiet when he moved here. Police found all sorts of stuff in his house. Pictures of us, notes about our daily routines, even some of our mail he must have stolen. It was a nightmare. We had to get a restraining order and everything. Tom eventually got arrested and moved away, but man, it messed us up for a long time. We're still jumpy sometimes, always checking to make sure the doors are locked. I guess the scariest part is how normal everything seemed at first. Tom was just the friendly neighbor, you know? It makes you wonder how well you really know the people around you. Now, whenever we meet new neighbors, we're a lot more cautious. You never know what secrets people might be hiding behind those perfect lawns and friendly smiles. We hope you enjoyed this chilling tale. If it sent shivers down your spine, give us a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. What was your favorite part? Don't forget to subscribe for more spine-tingling stories and hit that notification bell so you never miss a scare. Until next time, Stay spooky, and remember, sometimes the darkest shadows hide the most terrifying secret.